Good evening. I'm Glenn Lowry, Director of the Museum of Modern Art, and on behalf of Klaus Biesenbach, Director of MoMA PS1, and Ann Pasternak, Executive Director of Creative Time, I'm delighted to welcome you to this evening's conversation. The genesis for tonight really began several weeks ago when Ann and I were talking about what happened in Paris and the murders at Charlie Hebdo and the confusion that so many of us in the art world felt about how to interpret and understand this. And I turned to Klaus because Klaus presciently had organized earlier in 2014 a really brilliant exhibition entitled Zero Tolerance, which looked at how a number of artists who were concerned with social and political issues confronted regimes and situations where there was zero tolerance and how explosive that could be. And we're so thrilled that Sharon Hayes, one of those artists, is with us tonight on the panel. So Ann and I started talking about this a little bit, and we thought, well, why not convene a kind of dinner party, a conversation with people who we respect and who might bring different points of view and perspectives to this. And we began by thinking, well, who would be a great person to instigate this, to be the catalyst? And we both immediately thought of Sir Harold Evans, and we're delighted that he is here, Harry, as our moderator. And then we began thinking about artists like Kadir Attia, who could join Sharon, but maybe from a different perspective, and Asif Manvi, who comes from yet another perspective as a comic, Jason Mojica, who comes at this from the point of view of news and how that affects the interpretation of events, Simon Schama, a brilliant cultural historian, Carl Sharrow, a satirist, architect, and thinker. And their biographies are in this brochure, and we decided that we would simply hand this out in order to avoid having to spend precious time introducing everyone. They're all brilliant. You'll hear from them, and I hope you'll understand why we were so thrilled that they could join us. I want to especially thank Carl and Kadir because they have traveled from very far to be here just for tonight. I also want to thank Phil and Shelley Ahrens, Agnes Gund, and Susan Hayden for providing the support for this. All three of them really jumped on this because they value the question of freedom of speech, artistic license, and what it means to be in this very complicated world. This is a huge topic. We can only begin to scratch the surface tonight, but I hope you'll find this conversation stimulating. To the panelists and to Harry, we're deeply and profoundly grateful for your willingness to take this on, spend precious time with us. And to all of you, thank you for being here. And Zero Tolerance, which is at MoMA PS1, has just been extended to April 13th for those of you who have not had a chance to see it. Over to you, Harry.
We're going to start pretty quickly now. I'm holding a pencil. It's one of the things by which Hebdo proclaimed its faith, saying, a pencil is not a weapon, it's just a means of expression. And the first question I want to ask here is actually a very quick question, just to identify so you don't get these people mixed up. I want a yes, no, or maybe answer from them. Should there be any limit at all to artistic expression? What, Mr. Sharrow?
Absolutely none.
Absolutely not. Simon Schama.
In certain circumstances.
Okay, in certain that's all I needed. A qualification. Okay.
Yeah.
Jason Mojica.
Artistic expression?
Artistic expression. Well, we're in the Museum of Modern Art. Come on.
So no.
Okay. No.
Well,
no limit.
Harry, why don't you call it just free expression then? Because, No?
Well, you can come back. You're going to have time. It's okay. And we're going to ask Atif here, who's just flown in from Libya, Benghazi, everywhere around the world. He's off from his show at the moment. What do you say to that question?
I think it depends what you define as art.
It depends. This is now another equivocator.
Well, there's art and there's propaganda.
Wait a minute. I said artistic expression. What Gaddafi called artistic expression, I would call propaganda. But let's move on from Benghazi. Okay, Sharon.
I think there are limits.
You think there are limits. Okay, it's a brave lady. Okay, my friend?
I think limits, it also depends on which side of the limit you are.
There are limits.
Yes, I'm actually describing a fact rather than asserting an opinion in a sense.
Oh, well, you
There
can,
are
you can
limits.
do both. Give me an opinion and give me a fact. What's the opinion?
Sorry to interrupt.
It's fine.
What's the opinion? Should there be any limits to artistic expression? We're not talking about should there be a right to do an atomic bomb. I'm talking about artistic expression.
It's impossible to answer the should because it's impossible to know from where the should is being
Well, let me just
imposed.
take it. Do you want to qualify your answer, Kadir?
I think that the notion of art is definitely a dialogue, so you have two sides.
No,
And,
we're going to come along now.
And on the end, I mean, this, I think this limits is not fixed. It's never fixed. It moves. And this changing, distance towards the limits, it's up to many things. It's very difficult to answer that way, you know. It's up to the beliefs. It's up to the culture. It's up to the language. It's an endless question, and at some point it defines art, you know.
When you do your work, this work is so stunning, do you ever hesitate thinking, this is going to cause a row, someone's going to take offense at this? I mean, that wonderful representation of yours of the Muslim women of prayer, which is very, very striking. And did you ever think about the effect that might have?
I mean, you always think about the effect, definitely, because
Does it ever
there's this
inhibit you?
language.
Does it stop you?
No, I mean, you try, I mean, definitely when you create something, you try to dialogue with someone that you don't know, actually. And you definitely initiate something that do not have to fit in any frame or angle, you know. It's otherwise you proceed in a sort of self-censorship, and this is not art.
Very good. We've got an anti-censorship man at the very end who was quite explicit and outspoken at the moment. Now, you're actually criticizing the Pope in that statement. You know what the Pope said, you don't make fun of religion, right? Do you know the full quote? I'll give it you. I've got a Reuters report here, which is always very accurate, which is basically, I'll read it to you, which is, you don't provoke, you can't insult the faith of others. You cannot make fun of a faith. Right, what do you say to that? There's an artistic expression.
No, absolutely not. I mean, if
And
you
you
look
absolutely say absolutely
historically,
not to the Pope's dictum?
you're putting me against the Pope now.
I just want to be clear.
I think we should stage this as a one-on-one with the Pope. I'm happy to meet him in any forum. Yeah, I'll have to buy different clothes, though, because he'll win on that angle. It's really kind of remarkable to be there. And this, even the Catholic Church can kind of find its way back to reviving ideas about blasphemy and insulting faith that I thought we had put behind us in a historic battle against the insidious role of clerical institutions in public life. And I think it's very interesting to see this kind of historic decline that brings us to the point where the Pope can make such statements, where I think blatantly go against our experience of kind of promoting freedom of expression. And I don't blame him, because he comes to it from a faith angle. I blame the context that we live in that has re-encouraged this sort of censorious attitude.
Simon Sharma, you've studied the history of condemnations of art. We've been through the Brooklyn Museum and this city and all that stuff. So where do you come out on
But
this?
art isn't the subject, even in MoMA, really.
Good.
I mean, nobody, if you're in China or Russia, Harry, if you're at AY Way or if you're Pussy Riot or whatever, then your life can be on the line. But not here in New York, but the issue is, exactly as just been said, we didn't think, stupid us, that we're going to have to fight the Enlightenment battles all over again.
Yes.
And the issue now is how fiercely do we fight it? Does MoMA sever all relationship with China because of what happens when it persecutes artists? The same thing with Russia. It ought to.
It ought to.
Yes, it bloody well ought to.
Why don't you do that?
We have to fight these battles very fiercely. So when you ask me, for example, since art can be anything, are there any limits at all? And I want you to say free expression, because art is everything. the great heroes who should be with us on the panel here, the three Johns, Milton, Locke, and John Stuart Mill, said very clearly their absolute right to disrespect because, said Milton very beautifully in Areopagitica, a tract which will be on every school kid's curriculum, truth is strong and has no need of police, stratagem, or licensing. Those are the shifts and defenses of cowardly error. And the issue there is, when do those limits occur? It's very, very clear and simple. They occur when art or any kind of expression threatens to kill you, threatens to do you harm. If you allow that, then you're committing a kind of suicide. There is an issue about who decides what the nature of harm is. But that seems to me a quite clear principle.
Mm-hmm. Well, how do you decide, Jason, at Vice, when you're coming to decide whether... I noticed you did not republish or go to town on the second edition after we'd had the first attack, and then they decided to print 5 million copies of the magazine with a different cartoon of the Prophet on the cover. How did you decide at Vice not to do that? Vice is, you've just won a magazine award for your courage in reporting ISIS. So justify to me the rationale of not replying to the murders by continuing to reproduce Hebdo. Charlie?
I guess for us it was a question of, is this news? Is it news when a publication that is known for publishing offensive images announces that its response to this attack is to publish another offensive image, and here's the image, are you offended? I mean, really, the story is kind of told in the headline. I get the picture, you can just kind of explain what happened, and I don't really need it. So there's that moment where you don't really want to just be carrying water for someone. It's just a knee-jerk reaction you have to basically getting any press release from someone. And so for us, it was context is everything. It's kind of like, what do we get out of showing this image other than maybe just irritating some people who are not murderous bastards.
You're not scared?
No, because what I'm saying is that the very next day, we published a story about how it was flying off the stands, and it was a video story, and the cover was, in a proper context, it was useful. And it's basically using the same kind of criteria that we use for graphic imagery of war, which we also show a lot of, and it's does this add news value, does this help explain something that you didn't previously understand?
Nancy, where do you stand on this? Because you travel the world, theoretically and
Yes,
practically too.
from a green screen. Yeah.
I mean,
Where do I stand on
this general issue of, I mean, if you'd been running CBS, what is it now? I forget all over the place. Would you have republished or would you continue? How would you, if you feel that that was an outrageous action, the murder of these 12 people, and you were in charge of a television company, which I hope you will next week, how would you respond? I'm interested because you respond to the news all the time.
Well, I mean, look, I don't think that the Hebdo attacks had anything to do with freedom of expression or freedom of art.
You don't? Oh, it's interesting.
No, I think it was a political act by a terrorist organization. Look, to activate a base, it's very easy to go in and kill people and then yell Allahu Akbar and say, oh, this is to avenge the image of the Prophet Muhammad. And every single Muslim in the world, whether you're a fundamentalist or a traditional Muslim or a moderate, whatever, is going to feel something about that, right? So that's a very easy card to play to activate. Al-Qaeda, ISIS is taking all of their press. And so Al-Qaeda and ISIS are kind of like, Kim Kardashian and Miley Cyrus, right? They're sort of like we're kind of losing a lot of press right now. They're getting all the attention. We need to activate our base. Yeah. Let's go and avenge the Prophet for images that were printed 3 years ago. Yeah. And then every Muslim in the world is going to somehow feel something about that. On the other side, you get everyone going, freedom of expression, freedom of press, and people march in the streets with pencils. And it's very easy for the West to get behind freedom of expression because it's an easy thing to get behind. Nobody in this room is going to say we shouldn't have freedom of expression.
Okay,
so that's.
Are you a Muslim?
I am a cultural Muslim, yes.
Oh, cultural, okay. So you weren't offended by it?
In other words, I don't pray 5 times a day. So, yeah.
I know, okay. No, but just generally, would you or could you possibly have been offended by what Hebdos did?
The image of Muhammad
Yeah.
in a cartoon format, the way, yes, that affects me. That they have the right to do it. But
you wouldn't react like that,
as
but-
somebody who was raised Muslim, yes, I feel uncomfortable
You
with
feel,
it.
as the Pope suggested, you feel slightly offended.
Not offended, uncomfortable.
That's a better phrase, a better word. Okay, Sharon.
I mean, I agree that I think that there are other ways to look at the event other than through the lens of an attack on freedom of expression. And I think that there are certain things that focus forecloses, that it keeps away. There is no, speech does not exist before, it doesn't function that speech exists and then the freedom of expression comes to arbitrate which is protected speech and which is not, that these things are born of each other and have to do with regulations, inclusions, exclusions of expression, behavior, dress, et cetera, in public domain. And so inside of this event, there is a great complexity about how those inclusions and exclusions are conditioned in that particular site. We can talk about it here as well, because that is sort of where my answer to your first question came, is it's impossible for me as an artist to think, should there be any limit to artistic expression, because there just is. There are limits to the things we do and say. There are limits to the things we do and say. We live in a regulated...
Where do those limits come from?
They come from sort of law. They come from the ways in which some speech is designated as property and some speech is designated as expression. They come from a whole set of kind of histories and regulations and norms that regulate how we appear.
So you really want to hear with the gentleman to your right, in fact.
I want to
No,
what?
this one.
This one.
What
My
do you
left.
I'm actually to her left.
Okay. You're very perverse.
How'd you get to be the moderator?
Okay, you take over. Okay, now you can be left or right, I don't care. But that was
Well,
similar.
I think it's a good. It is for me an important point to kind of separate out the deep tragedy of the mass murder of this staff at Hebdo, and the police officer outside and the police officer in the secondary site, and so to separate out that tragedy and trauma from then the debate through which that act is named to have happened, named both by its perpetrators and then by us who talk about it afterwards.
Yeah. Candy, you're a Muslim too, right?
I don't know. I'm still working on it.
No, I'm just interested in getting personal reactions, because there's a wonderful book just recently being published by Natasha Aycott. Do you know it? Islam on Liberty, and he argues the case very strongly, a wonderful case he makes, that actually the violent reactions which is sometimes seen as a manifestation of Islam have actually been picked up culturally over centuries and don't express Islam as it was, and it's a wonderful piece of writing. He lives in Turkey, do you know? He wants to go back to the Ottoman Empire, basically, which was the most tolerant group of countries in the world when the Jews were being driven out of everywhere was the Ottoman Empire. Mm-hmm. So he wants to
a point.
Pardon?
Up to a point.
Is it up to a point? Okay, well, tell me what you think.
Well, you were second-class citizen. But non-Muslims in the Ottoman Empire had to pay an annual tax. You couldn't actually, there were regulations on the height of your building. You couldn't ride a horse. You couldn't carry a weapon. Up to a point.
But better than England.
Well, better than the Christians, but that was an utter nightmare. That's setting the bar really low.
Okay. Okay. I want to come to Jason. Jason, come back. I'd like to test Jason and Mr. Sharrow here. Look, everybody was outraged. It's an appalling thing at 12. Wouldn't the best way to react to that attempt at saying we're going to punish anybody who just, with due respect to my friend on the right or on the left, where he moves about, wouldn't it be best to say what we're going to do is we're going to publish 5 million copies of that thing to show you how much you're intimidating us, right? That's what I'm asking. What would you do?
No, I think, just to put it a bit in context, I think there was an overreaction when it came about this sort of, let's just galvanize about that issue and forget the whole kind of decline of free speech in the West, both due to government pressures, top-down pressures, and bottom-up pressure, where everybody now feels if they're offended by something.
think we're freer
they
than
have
ever?
No, our freedoms have been eroding. And if you look at the situation in France in particular, there's a whole series of exclusions to do with free speech that nobody was rallying behind. So it became a sort of position for the official kind of position of the French government is you have to publish this, you have to rally behind that image. No, the proper response would have been, let's show true commitment to free speech and remove all these exclusions, because that guarantees us all this healthy, robust public realm in which we all can voice our opinions freely. That would have been a much healthier response to my position, rather than saying, rally behind that image. No, rally behind the principle.
Ah, that's a good point.
It was quite disturbing, though, seeing newspapers in France publishing lists of who did and who didn't publish the Hebdo cover.
That's what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, and so, yeah, to that
Most
point.
of the non-French world did not republish the cover.
So, I mean,
It wasn't republished in this city, for instance.
yeah, it felt very 9/11, this kind of, you're either with
For-
us or against us.
So were the people who were, quote, suppressing the republication, that denying people necessary knowledge to assess the event, were they cowardly? Were they what? You can speak for the lot of them.
The motivations?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I think that's the other problem here, is that it's, we're always looking to make sense of things, and it's easy to kind of assume that, oh, this is an attack on free expression, when really it's just a group of people who had decided they wanted to make a mark, and they came up with a justification for it.
No,
right?
this is just completely clouding the issue. It is, what happened at Charlie Hebdo was censorship by murder. It's as simple as that.
My friend Kadir.
I wanted to say something that was following what you said, which I think it's extremely important, talking about this here in the United States, is that what has happened at Charlie Hebdo is definitely a French social, political problem that has to do within the French society and how the French society, since the end of colonization, has evolved until now. The thing is that, you have to just understand that, as this historian and thinker Paul Ricoeur used to say, memory injuries can be repaired. Can be repaired only with history. And in the French society, since the Second World War, but there was an acceleration with the end of colonization. The educational systems, especially on history, has completely given up the process of education. Today, the whole generation under the age of 20s are not educated by the school, regarding the French history, but by internet, by social medias. Not only Facebook, there are a lot of networks in which the young people spend days and days looking at the world, Yemen, Afghanistan, Iraq, the world through the prism of propaganda. And it is extremely interesting to understand how much the reaction of the young generation regarding what just happened at Charlie Hebdo has nothing to do with the reaction of what the media has shown us, like these 7 million people on the street. If you read the message, the Twitter message that the teenager exchange, it's absolutely scary. And there is this kind of rupture between the elite, intellectual, cultural, economical in France, and the basis of the society. And this gap is not only France. This is another point I want to let you know, is Europe. It works exactly the same in Germany, where I live 6 months a year, in Belgium, probably in England. You have this rupture between the top of the society and the people, and because of the technological possibilities of today, I would say that what has been lost as an educational project within a postmodern society, today is provided without any selection, any self-critique, it's just accessible. The virtuality became so close. And this is what has happened at Charlie Hebdo is, as far as I'm concerned, definitely a European matter and European problem. And it sounds like just the beginning.
What do you say to that, John? Mr. Sheriff?
Look, we've just met and we've had a great conversation. Now we have to kind of have an argument straight after. I think it's problematic to frame that incident within a kind of any sense of legitimate grievance within French society or even European society or even Muslim sections living within a European society, because the vast majority of Muslims in Europe do not manifest their anger or discontent or sense of offense in this manner. So when we say that message and then we say this is the result of kind of legitimate grievances, no, these people are the exception and they do not speak at all or represent the majority of Muslims who do not share that view. The troubling aspect about all of this...
Wait, okay.
No,
I didn't hear in this response, which I think has a lot of value in it, a legitimizing of the act.
No, absolutely not. I'm not suggesting that. I'm saying when we say this gesture of kind of angry retaliation had anything to do with those schisms, then we distort the fact that the majority of French people who are fighting against the injustices and structural racism don't do it that way. This is the trap. It's almost like a trap that lurks when we make this association, because there's genuine a kind of irrational injustice. The ban on the veil, for example, is a completely irrational act. And that people feel frustrated by that because it's kind of regulating your life in a very restrictive manner, but people don't choose to respond to that in this irrational manner. So let's just say those people are the exception, and there are legitimate struggles within Europe.
Right.
They're not limited to Muslims, by the way.
No, legitimizing terrorism.
I'm not, absolutely not. I didn't at all. I didn't at all say that he's legitimizing terrorism.
Isn't that what terrorists do, though? Isn't that what terrorists do? They use a legitimate social or political agenda,
Precisely.
and then they do something like this to bring the conversation about that, or to activate people to a radicalism, right? Isn't that the terrorist agenda?
And that's exactly what I'm saying.
Right.
So we should disconnect.
Wait a minute. Just a second.
I was telling you that just what has happened is just the visible part of the iceberg.
Absolutely.
This is the extreme, but it's linked to the rest.
I mean, I agree with you about the separation, but then I think your argument here has to be directed back here to this idea of it as censorship through murder, because yes, no doubt, it is an act of silencing, and it is an act of taking one's, taking, what is the phrase? Taking it into your own hands and executing the desire that you wish to have that expression shut up. But I think that to follow you, if I follow you, then my only position is to defend free speech, wherein I can't link the defense of free speech to the defense of various other freedoms that have been executed in the name of the West, or in my name. The defense of a kind of fighting for freedom in terms of democracy, the kind of war project.
Why not? Why does it extend to defending the right of marginalized French people, French Muslims and other sections of French society to actually benefit from this right of freedom of expression? Why don't we take it back to principle? There are now arbitrary decisions being taken in France. For example, the banning of pro-Palestine demonstrations. They are completely arbitrary, in my opinion. And you want to show that solidarity, allow those people the freedom to make these political protests, which takes us back to the point that we have to stick to the principle. The moment we start making exceptions, it weakens all of our ability to voice our grievances.
Okay, let me give you a question which is very current in France at the moment. On the day that Hebdo's published 5 million copies, the French, as you know, arrested
Dieudonné?
Dieudonné. It was a man who was anti-Semitic, said the Germans didn't finish the job. They said he's very provocative. He said, and he's been arrested for that.
Precisely.
Now, was he exercising legitimate freedom of expression, or what?
My first response to that was, and I wrote it on Twitter, it's very necessary to have Je suis Dieudonné now.
Je suis Dieudonné is what they're saying.
Because it's very important to defend his right to the extreme to voice these unpalatable views if you are serious and sincere about upholding the values of free speech.
right, Simon
And that's what
Sharma.
the French
So when
government
you-
didn't do.
Well, the issue, again, what was thrashed out for centuries now, is whether you are defending the principle of free speech by committing collective suicide. When the expression of free speech actually threatens physically to harm you, when what is being... Charlie Hebdo didn't ask people to go and kill anyone else. When Dieudonné says, "Je suis Koulibaly," he's actually essentially commending the slaughter of 4 people in the supermarket.
Yes.
An act totally dissociated from the Middle East situation,
So-
entirely because they were Jewish. So actually, I'm not sure what I feel about whether or not he should be arrested, but I know that exactly that line ought to be drawn, in my view anyway, when free speech can be shown to lead to homicide, to murder, and to acts of violence. And to the overthrow of the
Where
state.
does that
and
place
to-
Charlie Hebdo then? I mean, it's been...
Charlie Hebdo is not calling. Charlie Hebdo's sin was to disrespect people, was to cause offense. Then, as I just said, nothing in Charlie Hebdo, to my knowledge, urged people to go out and kill anyone else.
Right.
Dieudonné, more or less, does urge people to go out and kill
He
other
does, he
people.
does.
Yeah. And, more gas chambers. Okay, that's the line I want to draw. If, Hitler came
So
amongst
we
again,
have
I
a
would
great
want to draw that line
divergence
too.
here. We have on the one hand people saying, look, there was legitimate grievances here, you've got to have a slight understanding of how it arose and you shouldn't give offense, etc. And on the other hand, you have the anything goes school at the end. And you are trying to define a more explicit set of principles here, which is, in the United States Supreme Court, it's called imminent danger of causing harm to people. The Brandon Gun case, where the Ku Klux Klan ran a great campaign against what they called niggers, okay, and Jews, and everybody expected it to lead to violence, and the higher courts ruled it as out of order, illegal, and the Supreme Court finally said, no, there was no imminent danger of violence.
Exactly. I think it's a very important, it's a legal distinction, and it's not like it doesn't exist. It does exist. The principle of incitement is a very kind of well-defined principle, and I don't think there's not that I wish to defend Dieudonné, that there is a causal relationship between Dieudonné saying that and anyone going out there and acting on it. He's provocative. He's beyond probably most people's tolerance of what could be considered comedy, but it's not incitement. And if we're really committed to this principle, I'm afraid we're going to have to live with that. Otherwise, we're all going to have to say, let's just start making exceptions for everyone because we've accepted the principle of offense.
Yes, sir. You accept
Well,
that?
I tend to agree with you. Like, I don't know what is the causal thing of, like, somebody says, the Ku Klux Klan is allowed to march through the streets of America if they want to, and that is inciting violence. Is that inciting violence, or is it their freedom of expression to march down the street?
It's a
Well,
good
the
point.
ACLU defended them.
The Supreme Court made a difference between abstract sort of criticism, all blacks are lazy, all Jews are greedy, all Christians are, corrupt, whatever it was. The Supreme Court says, okay, you can say all that, you can argue it, you give evidence from history. Simon Sharma will testify one way, and then it says, but if it actually leads imminent to violence, then it's illegal, and you should. And that statute in Ohio was overturned. So that's the role of the United States at the moment. You can incite, but not for imminent results. Right?
Exactly.
It seems to me to be very limiting that. There's so much racial hatred speech around. I feel like stopping it all. But then I'm thinking I'm probably going to get accused of not believing in freedom of expression. And let me just ask you this. I can give you tomorrow, for instance, just take it away from Muslims for a minute. I'll give you images tomorrow from the Middle East of Jews portrayed in the most odious fashion. Just as I can give you images, not as many as I can find, of Muslims portrayed as violent, whatever it is. So we've got Islamophobia on the one hand, and we've got anti-Semitism on the other. These bloody things, do they cancel each other out? Where do we go? Come on,
Yes,
not the free
Islamophobia
speech.
and anti-Semitism cancel each other out. Good night. Thank you very much.
I think the only problem with that is it lets Christians off the hook as if it's the problem related to someone else, and we go back to the same issue. Again, let me reiterate, and I'm just going to speak from personal experience, because I grew up in Lebanon, and what bothers me about that notion of kind of trying to control speech like that we find uncomfortable, is because of the kind of sectarian divisions within Lebanese society. Lebanese government, or kind of the official systems, kind of produced this logic of irresponsible speech that threatens civic peace, okay? And I started to worry when I saw the similarities with the same language being used in the West, because in fact what it was used after the end of the Civil War coercively to shut down anyone trying to investigate what happened during that war, under the pretext that if you're going to dig, then it's going to cause problems and it's going to embarrass people, so you're threatening civic peace, and it kind of became the equivalent of this aggravating kind of racial tension
That
in
was
the
your
West.
point there,
And that's
isn't it?
really worrying.
I think so, yeah. I mean, what is interesting in what you just said, and I know also a little bit Lebanon, is that and I had this chat with architect Bernard Khouli, for instance, about the fact that in Lebanon, you actually live constantly, walking on ruins caused by the war, but nobody talk about it. And you have all these communities living, with like a town of shit under the carpet, but one day it will blow up on your face. It is exactly the way the French society has been built because of colonization. This is something you really configure here in the United States, but the injuries of colonization in French society is so deep and has never been, during the post-colonial times, there have never been a policies of educating, talking, repairing those frustration, expropriation, humiliation, among which Frantz Fanon was talking a lot, and all these thinkers of the anti-colonialism. The Algerian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, immediately after the attack, declared that these guys are not Algerian. They have French ID, they do not speak Arabic, we don't know them. They have never been affiliated with Algerian terrorist group, and that's true. They did this plot, this attack for Al-Qaeda in Yemen. So what is interesting to understand now is that the French society has completely changed. We have lived the last 10 years with the idea that the terrorism was Arab with a long beard and looks like Ben Laden. But now it can be anyone in your own societies.
Yeah.
Can you imagine this?
I guess for me that's like, of course, in a juridical sense, in terms of law and a kind of grounded principle of governance, freedom of expression has to be protected at all costs. You're right. But for me, I guess what gets sort of left out, if we follow or trace this, we stop at its censorship by murder and that's it, then what gets left is a question of, okay, well, law cannot tend to every matter. That on questions of expression, vis-a-vis responsibility, vis-a-vis the responsibility I have to take as an artist for the speech that I use, for the speech that I stand behind, for what I put out into the public domain, then there is a necessity, I think that is a collective necessity, to address and attend to the injury of speech. So even the injury of protected speech, even the injury of speech that, yes, is permitted and is permissible and can be distributed and published and circulated, but that I also feel as an artist and as a kind of member of revolving publics that there is a necessity to tend to
But how do you do
speech
that,
as a
Sharon?
relation, speech as a set of
How do you do
set of
that?
affiliations.
Sorry, Harry.
No,
Okay,
good.
I just want to ask, how would you do that, Sharon? If there's something that you feel that you're about to produce and you feel, as you say, you should tend to its potential consequences, what are your own guidelines to yourself about doing that? And I just want to add that the very important thing about Charlie Hebdo is that it's a comic, in a sense.
Yes.
And that the relationship between freedom and comedy goes back to the 18th century, possibly back to the 16th century, and is very, very important. The right to make offensive jokes against Jews or Christians or Muslims is very old and it's very precious, actually,
It's
to
a very,
our freedom.
one of the Charlie Hebdo's jokes, you know, was if you don't die laughing after 1,000 lashes, that's one of the jokes. I thought it was funny, quite frankly. But I don't see how anybody could take offense at that. 100 lashes if you don't die laughing at what they put inside. You wouldn't be offended by that, would you?
But but that's precisely, if you say, I don't know how anybody would be offended by that, then we can never get to the question of why are people offended by that? So how do we understand that offense, and where do we go with
But
that?
people are supposed to be offended. It's absolutely part of the lifeblood of democracy. We have a right to be disrespected, to be offended.
Actually, you can't have free speech without causing offense, otherwise you're not saying anything. It's an empty... And that's what Heb does. Right at the beginning of the magazine, they had an offensive... This is an offensive magazine, okay? And then they had some cartoon. And then this is an inoffensive magazine. They had a blank sheet. So you've got to have freedom of speech. You've got to offend somebody. You're bound to offend somebody. I'll be offended. Anybody can be offended by almost anything. You offend people every day, don't you?
I do.
Well, come on.
No, but they do it unintentionally.
No, but he's a jerk, you know.
Well, this leads to the first...
He's a great newsman. He's just been given a great award. You probably offended somebody somewhere.
Oh, yeah, all the time. I mean, to your first question about, should there be limits on freedom of expression, I say no, but I say that knowing that I've been someone who has expressed myself and been punched in the mouth for it.
Oh, you
and I
have?
think, yeah, sure. And I think that, there artists or people who are doing provocative things shouldn't be surprised when there's an equal and opposite reaction. Not saying that what happened at Charlie Hebdo is an equal and opposite reaction in any way, shape, or form, but I mean, it comes with the territory, so I just have a hard time when everyone runs crying in some Nancy way that they can't believe that someone is upset about, the piss Christ or something like that. I mean, it's like, it happens, and you have to deal with it. And I guess the question, maybe to what you were saying about dealing with the hurt of that speech is, what is the response to it? Is it to look for someone to intervene and protect your speech, or do you have to do the hard work of trying to change society to either see things your way or maybe move?
Let us say then, okay, if a Muslim was offended by Charlie Hebdo's relentless campaign of comedy, which some people found funny, they didn't find funny. So how can they seek remedy? Obviously, you don't go and kill people. Are you suggesting they just join the rational discourse, Simon?
Yeah, pretty much. We have reason is our guide, and freedom is all based on choice. And if, in fact, we want to try and persuade a society that it's improper or imprudent or immoral to publish a disrespectful cartoon of the chief rabbi of Muhammad or of Christ or whatever, then we do it by persuasion. We can shout our persuasion. We can't bloody well take a gun and make that the persuader.
Your great compatriot Jonathan Swift said as follows.
He was Irish.
Oh, Irish. That's all right. I lumped all the Brits together. Okay.
Yorkshire.
Remember, you can't reason somebody out of something that he's not been reasoned into, right?
Yeah, that's a counsel of despair.
Yeah, go on. Go, Sharon.
No, I think to kind of go back to that point about the impact of injury and offense, I think when we're looking at Charlie Hebdo, it's quite blunt, it's quite obvious. Where it becomes more problematic, but in fact is the root of the situation that we found ourselves in, is Satanic Verses and Salman Rushdie, where even if you go, Edward Said defended his right with all with all his might to write that book, even though many Muslims felt offended by it. And that wasn't a kind of a crass cartoon. It was a very, some people were very surprised that people could be offended by such an intricate literary work. And if you measure then that impact of the injury or the offense by the feeling of the receivers, you're always going to be in trouble. Because put Charlie Hebdo aside, we'd end up in a situation where we're actually debating whether Salman Rushdie had the right to publish that book or not. And that would become a really serious danger to everything that we all do, when we start to prescribe these
see,
But I'm
parameters.
trying to say we're not debating that. That is not the debate. The debate is.
But they're as injured. They're as injured.
says-
they're as offended
he
by the
says-
satanic
but
verses
I
as
never
they are
suggested- I never
by the
suggested that we-
comics.
Wait a minute. Okay, come on.
I never suggested that we deal with injury through prohibition, but I think when we create a kind of focus or a framework to say that either you support freedom of expression, you defend it at all cost, or you're non-rational, not modern, and your ideas are of the Enlightenment, then we are obviously ignoring something that is going on that has to be tended to and contended with. So for me, I mean, part of your example or your anecdote brings up also what is important to me about the ways that these work, which is that they're historically specific and they're contextually specific, in that we haven't been debating the representation, we haven't been fighting around the representation of the Prophet Muhammad for centuries. That some of this is actually quite contained in the near past, the kind of violent eruption of the debates around the representation of the Prophet Muhammad. So the question is, what is happening now?
Well, isn't it also being flamed? Isn't that representation of the Prophet Muhammad being used by certain people for political and for political agendas, including within the Middle East itself, like people in power who are activating certain groups in order to create that kind of so it's not just about, oh, we're offended by the image of the Prophet Muhammad. It's that people are using that as a political tool
Sure.
to do
Yeah,
other
that's-
things.
Yeah, I mean, you go, but that's
And even with
precisely
Salman
my
Rushdie,
point.
I think that was
Yeah,
part of
that's
it, right?
precisely my point. The reaction to the satanic verses was basically hooked up by the Saudi government and the Iranian government,
The fatwa.
or the fatwa itself. And there was a competition right after that for kind of gaining legitimacy as who kind of defends the rights of
That's what
Muslims
he-
more.
that's what he said.
But this doesn't solve our problem at all, because from the point of view of the injury and the perceived offense, it was probably more even than the cartoons at the times. I mean, you had public burnings of the book, the extent of the fatwa and the backing that it received. My exit out of this is to say this is not about Western values. This is where the disagreement is. These are ideas. The Enlightenment itself stemmed from a historic experience that passed through the Arabs, back to the Greeks. So this is a universal heritage that we've developed together, and we're now, let's not thump our chest and say these are kind of Western values, you have to follow them.
Right,
Let's
but I
say
think
they are
that-
universal
that is-
values.
That's what
that
you-
is the
yeah.
political agenda,
That's
right?
what he's
delete the
saying.
word Western.
But as soon as you start saying, like, this is Western values versus Islamic intolerance,
Absolutely.
Yeah, but
then you
absolutely.
have a war of
But very few
ideologies.
people you two agree with each other.
No,
Hey,
I
hey,
think
wait
a
a
lot
minute.
of people are.
You two agree with each other. You understand? He's agreeing with you.
No, my English is not so good.
But I do want to say,
Sam.
I think, well, I just, come to Vince's point, it's sort of obfuscation to say, oh, it wasn't really about intolerance, it was about politics, because the content of that politics is a kind of weirdly perverted form of theocratic fundamentalism. It's not a coincidence that the people who are most militantly violent in their hatred of, as they see it, representations of Muhammad are actually supporters of, a crazed form of Islamism.
Right.
Not the real Islam, of course not, but
Right,
actually,
which is a form of
politics
which
is
is a
itself
which is
religious.
a form of Islamism that we support in Saudi Arabia completely.
Well, we shouldn't.
you know,
We
it's-
shouldn't. I
oh,
don't
we-
That's what I'm
disagree
saying.
with
Like,
that.
Yeah.
the West, of course we should.
So answer the Saudi Arabia point.
Oh, we should absolutely, we should go and have a cold shower. Everybody mentions the Saudi Arabian guy, much less have, the royal family going there.
Wait. You come on, Jason.
Well, this is what I was getting at before. I feel like we're assigning far too much intellectual thought to these murderers. We're kind of seeing them as censors who had their sensibilities offended by an image, when more likely, again, I'm making assumptions here, they're just kind of participating, in basically
In a
wide map for violence that uses Islam as its excuse, that
I think that's a terrible
for
mistake.
young
I
men
think
who
that's a-
really, really want to do something that makes a difference in the world. And they've done it. They've done
That
it.
is what people said in the It's 1930s. They don't really believe in National Socialism. They just want to have a good time. Their testosterone is completely out of control.
No, what
And
I'm
they
trying to
love-
say is
and
that
they
they're
love
idiots.
Germany.
You're trying to say that they're part of
You're gonna come
a
in.
radical, very deeply thought out system.
No, it doesn't
I'm
have
just
to be
saying they're
deep-
fucking idiots.
want
No,
you
it
to come
doesn't
in
have to be deeply thought out, but radical Islamism is radical Islamism. Why are we so cowardly about saying that?
Right, okay.
I'm just saying I
actually-
doubt that they've read the Quran.
Okay, go.
No, that's
sure.
actually, I mean...
Wait a minute.
That's not
You wanted to come in. You can come in. Katie, I wanted to
I
give
just
him...
want to say that I don't think it's just some
It's-
guys out having a good time. I think there are legitimate reasons why these people are inspired by certain things. You know, there is a conversation about Iraq, Afghanistan, drones, Israel, Palestine. You know, these are legitimate conversations that we're not having because we're busy talking about Charlie Hebdo's right to put images of Muhammad on the cover
Okay,
of
but your point.
magazines.
Katie, come on.
Just let's go back 1 second. I'm totally right with this.
Come on, Katie.
Let's go back 1 second on the event of the attack. Actually, you have to remember that just after the attack, there was this big, huge demonstration in France. And I remember there was an interview of one of the survivors of the group, and the journalist asked him, for the next Charlie Hebdo's cover, will you put Muhammad caricature? And he said, of course. And the thing is that I think I have heard so many people, I mean, Muslim or not Muslim, saying that, okay, I am Charlie. But after the the cover of the second edition,
Right.
which actually was sold, I think, 7 million or something like this, Charlie Hebdo did not sell more than 30,000 exemplars before. Many people, especially Muslim, I have to say, said that there is something wrong here. And I have to say that after this very strong reaction, positive reaction, I mean, we saw flags from all around the world on the Place de la République in Paris, etc. The use, I mean, of this caricature, which, as far as I'm concerned, do not offend me at all, because I don't even give a shit to this. The use of that is definitely political. Because remember that just happened, this started riots all around the world. People were killed in Niger, in Algeria. What we really, really fear about, following the civil war of the 90s, there's now a rising terrorism again in Algeria. I mean, in the end of the day, what they are trying to defend...
Who's they? Who's they?
I mean, the cartoonist.
Who's they? Who's they?
The cartoonist. The cartoonist. What they are trying to do with this...
The cartoonist.
The cartoonist. With this Charlie Hebdo, especially with the...
Trying to work it out.
Especially with the second cover,
Pronouns
in the
cause
end of the
trouble.
day, they are really doing a political job. And I think this is probably what we have to remember, because this linked definitely the Charlie Hebdo affair with the political worldwide order. Someone was talking about Saudi Arabia before. You just have to understand that, or try to imagine that a newspaper like this, could not exist in Saudi Arabia.
I mean,
Okay.
we interviewed Luce, the cartoonist who
you
did
go.
the covers,
Jason.
and I think he was a lot less strident than that. I think he's just someone who is simply
Yeah, I
a
agree.
non-believer. Much as I am in all faiths. So, he's playing it a bit naive when he acts like he doesn't really understand what the offense is, certainly. But yeah, that's all. He just came off a lot less like someone who was actively trying to.
Yeah, Kabu, the artist who was killed, one of his cartoons, he said it's what is it? Let me get this right. It's tough being loved by jerks, and he pretended to be surrounded by Muslims. Now, I thought it was quite funny. What did you think?
It's funny.
Okay, it's funny. Okay. Look, the audience may have different views. You're welcome now to come up and solve all these problems which I have failed to solve. So I can't see anybody, which is a big advantage, actually. But there's somebody there. If you get a microphone and ask a question of any, just identify yourself if you don't mind. We're not cops, We're just trying to have a reasonable proceedings here. And if you want to address it to any particular panelist, do so, and be reasonably brief.
Yes.
No
my name is-
statements.
My name is Felipe Galindo. I'm a cartoonist. and I knew one of the slain cartoonists from Charlie Hebdo. I'm very familiar with their humor, and I think basically they were following a tradition from the French. We all cartoonists come from the French and the British press because they are the first who started doing political cartooning. So this is a tradition from centuries. And they have been always doing that, criticizing kings, ridiculing the ridicule. So the Charlie Hebdo team was doing that, and they were born in the 1960s, so it's very that kind of response to everything. They started attacking the radical Muslims after the 9/11 attack, and then, and with Salman Rushdie.
So what's the question then?
The question is, I think you are, well, I'm putting this in context because I believe that it has to do with many things, with religion, what the Quran said about the Prophet Muhammad, and I think it's been really misinterpreted. It goes to all directions, but there is not really a point here of defending the freedom that these cartoonists were exercising. And as Mr. Shama says, they were not provoking people to kill somebody.
Anybody going to comment?
I like those self-answering points, and we don't have to answer.
You want to say anything? Okay.
Great. Yeah, I mean, there was no question.
There was no question, I know.
It was just a statement.
Yeah,
so.
Can we try and make, it was a very worthwhile statement, but could we have some questions? I mean, ask one of these people, ask him what piece of sculpture he did last week.
No, over here, in the back. To the
Don't
left.
forget, we
to the
can't
right.
see you.
Here.
He's there.
My name is Aikuna Hoppe. I'm an anthropologist.
Terrible sound, I can't hear.
I would like to ask, why is it impossible to think about the response to the attacks in a term of a legal, juridical manner? So why is it that the end to the event happened as it happened? So the perpetrators, they were ambushed and then they were killed. So why can't we think of the ways in which, let's say, Norway handled the issue, right? So just bring them in front of a court and handle the issue by legal manners, as it is a case in every democratic society. So why did they have to be ambushed and be killed? So why can we think of that response? And the second point that I would like to make is just to say it a little bit with Freud, you know, sometimes a cigar is just a cigar, and sometimes a pen is just a pen, and just leave it at that. And my third point would be, can we talk about the offense, or
Just
can
get
we...
to the question.
She already had two.
No, the first one. No, I had a first
I know,
question.
they're making statements, which is fine.
Wait, well, let's go.
I'm
with
not
one and get
making a statement, I had a
clarification on
question.
Norway.
We're just to get the clarification on Norway, on Jyllands Posten. Go on.
No, I'm just asking for clarification on Norway. You're saying why can't things end
So
like they did in Norway?
why couldn't we have
Breivik,
be discussing the Charlie Hebdo or think of it as a legal matter, right? So terrorists, they committed an attack. So the response to it would be to bring them in front of a court and give them their sentence.
I guess we don't know if they were murdered or, I mean, I guess I don't know the circumstances of what exactly went down in that supermarket, but do you?
Well, yeah, well, it seems as though he'd already killed people and was about to kill more.
That's
so,
right.
you know, we couldn't really wait for Perry Mason at that point.
Harry, I've got the microphone.
Oh, here, there's a question here.
Hi, Steve Adler with Reuters. Despite the tenor of the conversation, it seems to me, and there will be a question, that the biggest risk to free expression actually comes from repressive governments, not from non-governmental organizations, by and large. You look at China, you look at Russia, you look at Turkey, you look at Egypt, you look at the numbers of ways that free expression and the free flow of information is being repressed around the world, and certainly as a journalist, the biggest threats generally come from governments. So my question is, what should people do about that? Should Western or should governments that don't believe in repressing information disconnect? Should they try to engage on this issue and put pressure? Because I think where we are right now is because of the desire to have a global economy and have everybody work together, nobody's prepared to really push those governments. So I'm interested in your perspective on what can be done about governments that are actually repressing
But
free speech.
I don't think any government really is that excited about freedom of expression. Completely. I mean, all of those hypocrites that showed up and marched, all those world leaders, they all have examples of repressing freedom of expression within their own countries. So I don't know if that is a government agenda. Like, you know, even in America, you can't.
All the nosegays at the bier of King Abdullah, you know, despite the fact that Raif was going to get another 50 lashes on Friday, it's, you know, business as usual, loathsomely, morally indifferent corporate capitalism.
Is it okay to say
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Okay. Jason, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was just thinking about how in most of those cases it's not artistic expression, but just actual factual information that is being repressed, which is probably more common than, you know, clamping down.
Which is the bigger danger, suppressing a painting of the Holy Virgin with elephant dung, or stopping you publishing some piece of information, which is the greater damage?
I mean, I'm not that big of an Ophelia fan, but I mean, so I guess I could do without the painting.
Okay. Okay. One final question, then we must go. Thank you, Mr. Adler.
Check.
It must be a final question.
Just on the note of freedom of expression, maybe to take it a little personally too. You know, so here we are in MoMA. You know, there's so many spaces in which we say there's freedom of expression, but we all know that you really can't say what you think in any context. So I'm going to put it to you guys. For example, in the Yards, talking about Israel-Palestine isn't exactly a friendly collegial atmosphere. So I'm wondering, for you personally, are there things within your jobs on Jon Stewart, or maybe in publishing on Vice, that you would like to say, but you know you can't actually say it?
Good. It's very good.
Where is that person?
We said that.
Oh, way back there. Oh, okay.
We know where you live. Okay.
Well, from my own experience, I have just 3 letters, BBC, which is a problem, can be a problem.
Look, thank you I want to bring this to a close because it's, unless somebody's got a cartoon they want to bring forward or to give us, or some kind of, I think we should, I want to thank the 3 panelists, the 6 panelists actually, the 3 this side and 3 on that side. Which is left and which is right?
This is, never mind.
I want to thank them for being so explicit and for wrestling with these questions, which we've been wrestling with since Aristotle. He was a Greek, remember, a long time ago. So thank you very much to the panel, and thank you for the audience.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Hey, very nice fun.